Horse War, Part 2, Abyss, Chapter 2, Section 1. Sergeant First Class Charlie O'Connor was pressed flat against the outside north wall of the 351st Transport Wing Officers Club. He was 25 feet above an asphalt parking lot with his boots in a pair of round indentations that were part of the decorative pattern that made up the facade of the building. When the music inside hit a crescendo, he closed the remaining 5-foot distance between himself and the 100-foot square balcony. Charlie was in black fatigues with a black watch cap on and black gloves on his hands. The potted furs at the edge of the balcony concealed him from the assorted officers and pilots milling among the tables and taking in the view of Fort Patterman, which stretched out in the New Mexico valley below. "Buster is setting the package down by his left foot," said the voice over the earpiece that only Charlie could hear. The voice belonged to Sergeant Vale, who was watching the balcony from the other side of the valley through trinoculars on the roof of the Fort Carson PX. Buster was the code name for Colonel Rathburn, the personal pilot for Admiral Titus. Charlie's team had been surveilling Colonel Rathburn for 10 days to establish his routines and determine the best moment to steal his keys. The keys in question, which were actually a set of access cards attached to a metal ring, allowed Colonel Rathburn to go almost anywhere Admiral Titus went. And from 10 days of surveillance, Charlie's team learned that at the end of a regular duty shift, he dropped the access cards into a Velcro pouch on the outside of his briefcase, which Sergeant Vale was calling the package. Charlie stepped onto the outer edge of the balcony, holding onto the railing and crouching low. He squinted through the furs and saw the colonel at his regular table with a cigar in his mouth and the Fort Carson Times folded on the table. After the waitress took his order, he unfolded the paper and started reading an article about a recent spat of burglaries being attributed to some middle school children of enlisted personnel who lived on post with their families. Holding onto the railing with his right arm, Charlie gave a quick hand signal to Sergeant Jeffries, who was standing in the shadow 25 feet below, between a food service delivery truck and a desert camouflage ATTAV. Sergeant Jeffries, who was wearing a dark gray tracksuit, walked up to Colonel Rathburn's Ford full bed and shattered the passenger side window with a rock. Colonel Rathburn and 4 other officers seated on the balcony immediately looked up at the sound of breaking glass. "My truck," Colonel Rathburn said once he saw the man in the tracksuit leaning in the window of his truck in the parking lot below. He dropped his newspaper and raced back inside the club. 4 other officers, a major, 2 captains, and a lieutenant, rushed to the north side of the balcony to see what was going on. Charlie climbed over the railing, slid between the furs, and crouched down next to the colonel's briefcase. Below, Colonel Rathburn burst out of the first-floor double-door entrance to the officers' club. Sergeant Vale took off to the north with the colonel in pursuit just as Charlie got a hold of the access cards. He counted them, 6 in all, and from the cargo pocket of the left leg of his fatigues, he brought out a set of similar-looking access cards that had no access data. He pulled the cards off of the dummy set, leaving 6, and dropped them in the Velcro pouch. No one in the growing group of spectators gathering at the railing saw Charlie as he went back over the railing onto the west side of the balcony and dropped and rolled onto a small patch of grass at the edge of the parking lot. He scaled the fence at the edge of the parking lot and jogged to the south down the narrow corridor between the officers' club and the bachelor's officers' quarters next door. At the south end of the corridor was Sergeant Vale in a green shooter's jumpsuit at the wheel of the 3rd Squad's ATTAV. "Let's go," Charlie said, closing the passenger door between them. Sergeant Vale pressed down on the accelerator and the ATTAV sped down the narrow 2-lane road lined with 2-story barrack buildings. As they turned left onto the post's main road, a trio of flashing lights sped by, about 30 feet in the air. It was an MP air prowler on its way to the crime scene. 5 minutes later, they arrived at the south edge of the 351st Transport Wing Air and Space Field. Charlie put his arms through the small knapsack that contained, among other things, the keys stolen from the pilot at the officers' club. Sergeant Vale slowed the ATTAV down to about 10 miles per hour. When Charlie saw the small red glowing 15 OMM light on the ground at the edge of the air and space field's perimeter fence, he stepped out, tumbled in a controlled roll until he was out of momentum, and then jogged to the spot where the 15 OMM light was. Sitting down in the grass and facing the fence, he opened the knapsack and removed a helium canister, a 2-foot mylar balloon attached to a lanyard, and a harness. Charlie attached the lanyard to the harness with a C-clamp and put on the harness, and then put the knapsack back on over the harness. He inflated the balloon and tied the green 15 OMM light at its bottom where it attached to the lanyard, and then he waited. He released the balloon when he heard the whine of a dual-engine VTOL orbit transfer craft coming to life. He watched its nose and wing tip light illuminate as its 2 large turbine engines, now vertical, slowly rose from the flight line, turned 90 degrees, and soared upward where he was sitting. An instant after it passed directly overhead, a pair of horizontal cables suspended underneath snagged the lanyard underneath the balloon and snatched Charlie and his stolen keys into the air. The lights of Fort Carson sped by below, and Charlie noted familiar landmarks as the cable rotated and lifted him into the hull of the craft, drawing him closer. Charlie saw the old Philosian War-era barracks that his unit was housed in for this exercise, the first of the 503rd Infantry Mess Hall, where they'd eaten, and there was the 351st Transport Wing's Officers Club, growing smaller and smaller. He could have even seen the flashing lights of the MP vehicle there to investigate an attempted robbery if he had looked. The view below disappeared, and Charlie felt submerged in a mist as he was dragged through a cloud. Then he was pulled up through the bottom hull of the VTOL-OTC. He sat on the edge of the opening and pulled his legs in. Lieutenant Rex Patterson, clad in a green flight suit and adorned with the stolen 351st Transport Wing shoulder patch that showed an eagle flying above the earth, closed and sealed the hatch, making the cabin instantly much quieter. "Show them to me, or I'm sending you back out," Rex said with a smile. Charlie fished into his knapsack, feigning confusion and surprise. "I know I had them. The 10 commandos, all in full ship-to-ship orbital assault gear and seated along the edges of the cabin, laughed." Charlie showed Rex the keys. A cheer rose from the cabin as Charlie rose and followed Rex forward to the cockpit. He felt heavier and heavier as he made his way across the deck plates and through the narrow electronic equipment line vestibule that connected the cockpit to the main cabin. Rex dropped into the co-pilot seat next to Chet Borton, a young warrant officer who had just finished cross-training with the Fleet Amphibious Assault Teams. What a skill to have on an orbital raid, Charlie thought. Rex held up a hand. "Let's have them," he said. Charlie handed Rex the keys as he watched the faint, glowing line of the horizon slowly bend. The curvature of the earth was becoming visible. If they did this right, they'd be at their destination while still on the night side. "Looks like there's some traffic up," Chet said, glancing up at the ARRAAYDAR display. Charlie could see at least 5 sets of winking lights from various craft just reaching orbit. Rex slid one of the key cards into a slot on the console to his right. He pulled on a headset and turned on a switch so his conversation would be on speaker. Parthenon, this is Echo 1, Echo 715, break. Request permission to dock on one of your Bravos, he said.